Hello. We will talk about the art movements between the two world wars. When we talk about the art movements between the two world wars, we talk about Europe, what kinds of effects that the world wars had. And we know the First World War happened from 1914 to 17, and you have the Second World War 1939 to 44-45. So between these two world wars, you have artists responding to the kind of trauma that the European society had went through. And if you know, many of the artists and writers and intellectuals had to actually go fight in the trenches in both the world wars. So they were really affected. So when we look at the second decade, what we have as art movements are abstraction, Dadaism, and Surrealism comes but little later, and largely abstraction. And as a response to the disturbances of First World War, we have Dada as a Dada movement, Dada art movement. And along with that, we have very interesting movements of design. So establishment of design schools happened by the end of the second decade. So today we will look at these art movements and through them try to understand how the artists were responding through their artwork with the socio-political situations that they were facing, right? So to begin with, and we have seen abstraction before also. To begin with, we will look at the abstract art. Abstraction emerges by the end of the first decade of 20th century, by 1910. It sort of begins, we have seen Wassily Kandinsky has actually started experimenting in abstract language. So we have several artists and abstraction becomes international. And what is abstraction? Abstraction is nothing but disengaging with the reality, right? Representational art, when you represent something in a painting, that means you are representing something that you see in the nature or you see around. Abstract art is not representing nature, but it is withdrawing from nature, it is moving away from nature. So abstraction, the abstract art was influenced by different philosophical and theological propositions regarding life and regarding man, regarding society. So what happens through abstract art is the idea of feeling, the concepts like feeling, spirit, purity, So these are basically transcendental concepts. These are not worldly concepts. So what happens through abstract art is there happens a move from the worldly things to the transcendental concepts. The worldly things, let us say a still life, a landscape, a portraiture, or a bunch of people, or a kind of a composition which is located somewhere. So these are all worldly things. These are all representing the world. So what happens in abstraction is, abstract art is, artists move away from these worldly things, move away from representing these worldly things to the transcendental concepts. Transcendental concepts are feeling, spirit, purity. So what is feeling? It is inside, right? Spirit is something that is related to the inside. And these feelings and the spiritual experience are understood as more pure than the worldly experiences, right? Then when you look at a landscape maybe, or when you look at a street. So this was a major kind of an influence. This was a major sort of an influential shift that happened at this point of time. And abstraction and abstract art, if you look at, they do not show anything, right? The artists use color and composition and different elements of making painting, but without showing what you can see outside, right? So it is more about the internal feeling, the internal spiritual experience, and the purity of those experiences. So in this context, what happened was, like, there are 3 to 4 trajectories, 3 to 4 ways in which abstraction has emerged. The abstract artists, some were continuing with the kind of painterly aspect of Impressionism, like if you look at Impressionism, the impasto color treatment and all. So Kandinsky and several other artists actually continue using that kind of a brushwork, that kind of a painterly mode of creating images. And the other group or other trajectory, other kind of abstract art is using certain expressive dimensions of post-impressionism. Let us say Piet Mondrian. Mondrian initially did that, where he was transforming the nature, he was transforming, though it was a move away from the worldly, away from the world, but what Mondrian did was he kind of abstracted certain kind of a fundamental reality, certain kind of a basic dialectical spiritual reality, certain kind of a purity. He abstracted that purity from the nature itself, right? So he could be seen as a sort of a continuation or the kind of expressive dimensions of post-impressionism, right? So another trajectory is where the artists were using the linear designs, okay. Paul Klee could be one, and you have several other artists who were using the linear designs, the linear quality of Art Nouveau movement. There was a movement in the late 19th century called Art Nouveau movement of design particularly. So you have the abstract artists using different already existing ways of painting, but these artists moved away from the representation of nature or representational art into abstract art, right? So you have on your screen, there are some names, and abstract art becomes international very quickly. So Robert Delaunay was French, was one of the early abstract painters. Piet Mondrian, he was a very important painter from a Dutch painter who worked largely with a sort of a simplified, pure forms and geometric sort of an organization of shapes and forms. And Kandinsky, Vasily Kandinsky was a Russian, and he moved to Germany and then later moved back to Russia during the World War, and he travels between Germany and Russia, and he used largely the sort of impressionist brushwork, that kind of a free brushwork of application of pigment, and you can see very organic, not geometric, but very organic sort of canvases, very organic, free-flowing forms and lines and application of color in Kandinsky's works. And Malevich was a Russian also, but Malevich worked with the geometric sort of abstraction. And another artist is Paul Klee. Paul Klee was a very interesting artist who sort of imbibed several influences. So he was he imbibed post-impressionist, particularly post-impressionist as well as cubist tendencies. Apart from these, he was also influenced by the child art. So he used all these sort of ways of painting, and he evolved a particular kind of geometric, but at the same time more fluid kind of an abstraction. So you have different ways of abstraction. It is not like one way. You have geometric abstraction, you have a more free freewheeling kind of painting where you work freely with your brush and pigments, not restricted by the geometricity of the shapes, but it's more like a free experience as you paint, or the feeling of freedom when you paint. and Paul Klee in a way bridges the both, but all of them have engaged with some kind of a spiritual sort of an understanding when it comes to abstract art. So, when we look at the artworks, let us look at the artworks, and the first slide that you see of the painting is Robert Delaunay, and it is called the first disc. He painted it in 1914, end of the beginning of the First World War. What he said is this: Cézanne broke the fish dish, the fruit dish, and we should not glue it together again as the Cubists did or do. What he means was, when you look at Cubism, the Cubists analyzed the object. They kind of saw the object from all the sides, they analyzed it, but they kind of combined all those viewpoints together to make a painting. What Delaunay does is, he by this proposition, what he means is, when you are breaking the bottle, when you are breaking the fruit dish, right, you don't glue it back with multiple perspective. We don't need to. So, when you remove, when you break it and you arrange the pieces separately, when you break the fruit dish, or when you break an object, it becomes abstract, right. For example, if you look at this painting, it could be very well, it could be a fruit dish which is broken, where you are arranging not in a cubist logic, but in a more flatter logic, in a more it's more flat. The cubists wanted to make the painting more flat, but abstract artists actually have made it more flatter. It's more flat, where the strips, where the pieces of fruit dish may be arranged not in a combination, but separately, one after another. So, it becomes more abstract, right. So, this particular painting that you see here is a circular painting, but he is using different kinds of colors and the color logic, and it is more abstract, it is geometric, it is abstract, and it does not show, it does not represent any object that you see in nature, that you see outside. It is entirely about this pure feeling when you look at it, and the kind of experience that you have, the sensibilities that you experience when you look at it. It's more pure visual experience, right. So, this is an example of geometric abstraction. And another artist is Kazimierz Malevich. He's a Russian, and this painting, an Englishman in Moscow, he painted at the beginning again of the First World War, 1914. And this shows a remarkable influence of Cubist paintings, right. The way text is being used, the way the faceting, and the way the kind of flatness is employed. And you can very well make out the presence of the man, the human figure, and in front of the human figure there is a fish, and you have different forms, but still they are recognizable, they are properly painted. They are not like working in a cubist logic, but it works like different elements are combined together in a more one after another, right. So, it is not about representing the nature that you see, but representing what you have in your mind. It is more about the idea, right. It is more about the concept. One can paint very well the Englishman, but with the Englishman, Malevich is painting different elements, different motifs, and these motifs sort of combine together and form a story about this Englishman. It tells about this Englishman. It is not only about the appearance, but the story is something that is surrounding this appearance, right. So, these elements combine together and form the idea of an Englishman, right. So, it is not about what you see you paint, but it is about what you know. So, the knowledge and the idea of the Englishman is being represented in this kind of a painting, and the pictorial logic and composition is very different from the earlier ways of painting. So, though it is influenced by Cubism, it does not entirely follow the logic of cubism. So 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 is an important artist. Quickly 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 moves, you can see in this next slide, 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 moves into this pure abstract painting, right. So this is an exhibition view called 0.10. This was the title of exhibition. So in 1915 in Petrograd. What you have here is the kind of display, if you look at, he displayed the paintings throughout the gallery walls, right, which is very unusual. And you have the black square placed in the corner. Corners were never used for displaying. Okay. It is only at this point, particularly in Russia, these artists were experimenting with different kind of display activities. Another artist you can look for was Tatlin, Vladimir Tatlin. Tatlin made several corner sculptures, right. So this also again coming from the cubist experimentation. But coming back to the abstraction, 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 again was influenced by the Eastern spiritual, understandings, particularly the Eastern philosophy and the Asian philosophy, the Oriental philosophy, what they used to call it as Oriental philosophy, really sort of influenced the artist at this point of time. And why? The question is why? Because there was this question also for the people, for the society in Europe at this point of time, because Europe was the most advanced, or yet even now it is one of is the most advanced civilized modern societies, right. It had industrialization, it accumulated a lot of wealth, the society got progressed, and you have flourish in literature, culture, cultural expressions. So Europe could be seen as the most advanced, most developed and progressed in all the fields, not only industry but also culture, and in understanding the civilization and everything in terms of discoveries, in terms of science. But after all these achievements, they saw First World War, and after that they saw Second World War, right. So the question was, if Europe was progressed, if it was very well developed, it was sophisticated in terms of civilization, then why did it go for war? Why did war happen, right? So they felt that there are some problems, right? So to understand these problems, to kind of find answers to these questions about their own society, the artists started looking inside, right? They started looking towards the spiritual, which is like again propounded by the Oriental philosophy according to them. So at this point of time, the as I said, Oriental philosophy really influenced these artists, and 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 was one of them, where they wanted to renounce the world, okay, renounce the worldly reality, and they wanted to sort of show the spiritual experience, show the purity of spiritual experience. Okay. So it is about that basic fundamental spiritual understanding, and which is why what you see here is the basic geometric forms, right? And square is the most perfect form, square is the most complete form, and you don't need anything more than a square to talk about the completeness. So the idea of completeness of the self and various other ideas, philosophical, spiritual ideas of that kind, the notions of completeness of the self and all these ideas. So that could be seen reflected in the ways 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 has used geometric forms and his compositions. So the slide that you see next is this black square, the square that is displayed in the corner. So you can see there is nothing here. What you look at when you look at this painting, it is just the black square, and you don't see anything. What you see is this dark space, and it may allow you to kind of have some contemplation. You can think about, you can look at it as if you are looking inside yourself, right, as if you are searching in the darkness. So you can have several other interpretations, but what you get to see and the understanding of this square is this idea of completeness, the complete fulfillment within this, the pure form. And it is this pure form. The geometric forms were understood as the pure forms. They were not manipulated by any other representations, right. So moving on to the next artist is Piet Mondrian. Mondrian was a Dutch artist, and he started painting in his own place, but he moves to Paris, and then he gets influenced from the Parisian art movements, and Cubism was one of the influential art movements. Otherwise, he was painting largely in post-impressionist painterly language, and you can see this painting, 1908, is an early painting, and he painted this tree several times, and he sort of, one can understand abstraction. He abstracted the fundamentals, the fundamental elements of painting through nature. Okay, what you see here is, the horizontal spreading of the branches, and you have a vertical trunk of the tree, right. So you have a sort of a dialectical contrast, right. So you need one for the other, and you need branches for the trunk, you need trunk for the branches. So this dialectical sort of a relationship, but there is a contrast relationship. So what you see pictorially, the branches are spread throughout the canvas, almost creating a sense of balance on all the sides, and this balance is held by the tree trunk, right, the solid tree trunk, and you get this feeling of the solidity in that trunk when you look at it, and this quite harmonious sort of a spread of these branches, right. So this is an early painting that he did, and if you look at the next slide, he did it, let's say, after 3 years, where he calls it as horizontal tree. And what you see here is he is removing all those realistic dimensions, all those recognizable dimensions. It doesn't look like tree like the earlier painting used to look, right. So he is reducing, right, he is reducing all these material, worldly properties of a tree, right. So the details are reduced. Those details are basically the worldly properties of a particular form. So he is reducing all those, and he is going deeper inside the structure of the tree. It is not about the appearance, but it is about the structure of the tree. So he is trying to kind of abstract the basic structure of the tree, the combination of vertical and the horizontal. And you can see from this he moves into a painting like this in 1915, and he calls it as composition number 10, Pyre and Ocean. And these are very interesting combinations of Pyre and Ocean, where ocean is horizontal, right. It is the most horizontal image, or the image of horizontality that one can have, and the pyre is nothing but this huge thick column, pillar, right. So the pillar that holds the huge building, for example, a Gothic church, right. Gothic churches, cathedrals are the tallest architecture, cathedral architecture we have on the earth, right, apart from the modern tallest towers. But before the modern times, you have Gothic architecture. Gothic cathedrals were the tallest structures. So those tallest structures were held by these huge pillars called pyres, right. So here you have the combination of the verticality of the pyre and the horizontality of the ocean, right. So he sort of is arriving at this basic logic of verticality and horizontality, and a sort of an integration, a combination of these two things. So he is removing all these worldly properties, the worldly appearances, and going down deep into the basic structure, that is the spirit, right? That is the pure structure, right? So this is the idea of one kind of an abstraction, right? So this is the idea of what we can see in Mondrian, what Mondrian has been doing, and you have seen in Malevich in one kind of a way where he is dealing with the geometricity of shapes, and Mondrian is very different, and Delaunay was more pictorial, right? He was more interested in the pictorial arrangement of colors and shapes, not in terms of this sort of a process of abstraction, right? So Mondrian also, so from this basic pure forms or pure elements of painting, he draws these pure elements of painting, the lines, the geometric shapes, and the color. And you look at this slide, the next slide, he painted quite late when he moved to America, Broadway Boogie Woogie. Before this painting, he painted several other paintings in a similar manner, using the straight lines and the geometric sort of shapes in between and primary colors. So what he did from the tree, from the first tree to the later this painting, is he reduced everything into the basic elements of painting, right? Basic elements of representation, where lines, you can see lines here, and you can see horizontal, you can see rectangular, square shapes, squares, and different colors, but these colors are primary colors, right? So this is the pure stage of painting. He sort of reduced everything and then brought painting to this pure stage. So this is one kind of an abstraction we can see in Mondrian. So we have seen several abstractions, abstract trajectories of painting, and we have seen Kandinsky earlier already, and now we will move to a sort of a movement called Bauhaus movement, and the slide that you see on the screen is about Bauhaus. Bauhaus was a design school actually. It was established in 1919 in Germany. It was a very important design institute, and this particular design institute really revolutionized the modern design. They used industrial material and designed for the modern living. So these are very important logics for them. And when it comes to the imagination of form, you can see the abstract art, the abstract forms that you see in abstract art could be seen very closely resembling the designs that we see in Bauhaus, right? Which is why it is important for us to kind of study. And also, as a school of design, it is very important school of design, which produced goods, furniture, different kinds of objects for the modern living, and that shows, and that actually had an impact throughout the world, that in fact came to India very forcefully, right? So Bauhaus was established, the founder member of Bauhaus was Walter Gropius. Gropius was an architect and designer, but fundamentally an architect, and along with his other architect friends and designers, he established this school. And what are the aspects, what are the important points about Bauhaus is simplicity, functionalism, and emphasis on the hard craft ethic, right? Though they were producing designs for the industrial production, right? We have industrialized production already established in Europe, and most of the industrial goods were really bad looking, okay? They were not well designed. So in the 1919, Bauhaus school was established to create aesthetically appealing designs, but with simplicity, and not just simplicity but with function also. So the design should fulfill, it should look simple, it should have aesthetic appeal, but it should be functionally perfect, and there should be a sense of craft. There should be a sense of strong craft. It's not that everything is made by the machine, but there should be an involvement of the mind, that which is the mind of the designer, right. So the ethic of the craft, the crafting of the object. It is not just reproducing by the machine, but how do you craft it? So to make it aesthetically appealing, simple, and functionally equipped, right. So Bauhaus, by the time there were different design schools already were there, right. So Bauhaus is a school in Germany that combined crafts and fine arts. This is a very important point when it comes to Bauhaus. The Bauhaus artists and designers, they combine the fine arts sensibilities with craft, right. So which is why we get a very interesting designs. It operated so from 1919 to 1933. This is the time when it was active, and in 1933 it was closed down by the Nazi party, by Hitler, right. And Bauhaus school was found by Gropius, and the name Bauhaus means to build, that means the house, right. So the style became one of the most influential currents in the modernist architecture also. So not only design, but also architecture. So it was a revolution of design actually, you know. And if you look at this building, the next slide, this is the building of Bauhaus, okay. So a very systematic sort of distribution of different activities here, and the entire building is constructed or planned along with, you know, you have workshops somewhere, you have designing studios in other place, and you have a store. So all these things are sort of very well organized. And let us look at some of the examples of Bauhaus designs, and this slide that you see on the screen is by Joseph Albers. And these stools, you know, the tables that you see now, designed in 1926 with multiple colors and very simple design, but you know, you can see they are very functional. You have different sizes and different shapes, and now also you can see this design continues, and now also we can find here such stools, such tables, but you can see the kind of design, the simplicity of the design in this, and the aesthetic appeal also. Joseph Albers was fascinated by the color, okay, and the ambiguities of visual perception as well as spatial perception. So he experimented with different combinations of color, and you can see here using just one square, and he called this effort, this series, as homage to the square, right. So where he arranged, as you can see, different squares of different sizes, of different colors, right. So on the left side you see he's arranging different kinds of yellow squares, right. The yellow squares, the 4 yellow squares are combined together, and it creates a different experience when you look at it, right. So you feel different when you look at the other 4 squares that are arranged on the other, you know, on the right side. So by just changing the color, you get different psychological, different visual effects, you know, the perception changes, you know, you get different sense of animation. For example, the green comes forward sometimes, and the green goes backwards sometimes. So there is this sense of movement created in the eye, you know. So the visual perception is manipulated by using the colors, and Albers played a lot of such experimentation. And Annie Albers was the wife of Joseph Albers, and she was good at tapestry, and she produced many wall hangings like this using the geometric designs. And as you can see here, these 2 wall hangings are the examples of the, you know, using tapestry for the wall hanging, and you can see the sense of the color, the newness of the combination of color and the geometric language, the geometric character of the design also. The next artist is Paul Klee. Paul Klee was a painter largely, but he joined Bauhaus school and he created many tapestries. So fantastic tapestries he created. So this is an example, this is not an example of tapestry, but this is an example of painting, but the design itself is very much closer to what his tapestries used to be. And as I said initially, he took influences from different sources, and we could see those influences in his paintings as well as in his designs. Now let us look at some of the objects like furniture, like different objects of everyday use. And the slide that you see on your screen is by the two chairs designed by van der Rohe. Van der Rohe was one of the faculties teaching at the Bauhaus. And what you see here, the materials that are used are not wood or conventional materials. These materials were industrially produced. This is very important a point when it comes to Bauhaus. They used industrial materials, but they sort of used according to the character of these industrial materials. They used the potential characters of these materials. For example, look at the chair on the right. The entire chair is done by using single pipe, right? You can see it is just one single pipe, right? By just molding that pipe, without joining, there is no joint in that entire structure. So there is only one joint where the two ends of the pipe meet. So by using, so the character of the pipe is, you can mold it, but still it has the strength to stand. It won't bend. So the character of the pipe is used, and the design is planned according to the character of the material they were using, right? So this is a very important sort of a principle. The chair on the left side also, it is the combination of two pipes or the intersection of two pipes, right? And that is enough. You don't need to have extra support. So it is a very acute understanding of engineering and a very acute understanding of the potential, the qualities and the characters of the materials they were using. The next slide that you see is again two chairs, but by another designer called Breuer Marcel. Marcel Breuer was a very prominent designer, and these two chairs were really popular, and particularly the chair on the right side was popular throughout the world. And we could see those chairs also in India, where it is produced again by using one single pipe, by just bending and molding the pipe, right? And you have a structure, the armature is created by using that pipe, and it looks very elegant, it is very simple, and you just have two legs, but the two legs has the strength to hold the entire chair and take the weight of the body, right? So this is the principle, this is the kind of practice that we see in Bauhaus, right? So moving on to the next slide, what we have is pots, teapots, and it's very interesting and very elegantly sort of designed, very simple, and geometric shapes are used here, but very simple. If you take the first pot, it is just like, it looks as if a circle is cut into two and just the circle is moved to the right side, the top portion of the circle is moved to the right side, and that is the handle, right? So these are very simple but also functional as the principles of Bauhaus design. And the next slide is this lamp, the table lamp. Again, it is the simple design using the basic geometric sphere, and he's just cutting that sphere and using two circular shapes, and it looks aesthetically quite appealing. It is very simple, but there is very good understanding of craft. It is not designed just like that, but there is a lot of thought went into the design, and the design shows. Apart from the objects and furniture and other things, they also have designed a particular font like this called Bauhaus font that you see on the screen. This is a design by Bayer, a designer called Bayer, who was part of Bauhaus school, and this font is again very much famous, and it is being used extensively for various typographic activities, typographic designs. So we have seen one design school, and in that we could see how simplicity function, but at the same time you can also relate those designs with the abstract art, the geometric abstract art that we have seen before that. Another art movement or the design movement is 𝗳𝗧, and the slide that you have on your screen is about 𝗳𝗧. It's a Dutch movement, and Mondrian was part of this movement, the Mondrian, the abstract painter that we saw. And it is nothing but literally the style. 𝗳𝗧 means the style, it is Dutch. So it was founded by a painter and architect called Theo van der Burg. He was a very important and very influential person, architect and painter, who also released a journal of design in the name 𝗳𝗧 again, and this was established in 1917 in Leiden, right. So it had encompassed a new type of style in modern art. So both in terms of modern art and architecture, they wanted to create a new style. That was the idea. The movement used the artistic talent of the artists by designing homes, buildings and furniture. So they used artistic sensibilities and artistic talent for designing different things, homes, buildings and furniture. So the example that you see on the right side is a chair. It is again designed using the geometric shapes, right? Flat, straight geometric shapes and simple geometric shapes, but the entire chair is activated by using the color, right? The color, the primary colors, again it very much close to what Mondrian uses, the primary colors and the paint is used. So the design over here is not only functional like Bauhaus, but the design should also have a visual pictorial sensibility, right? A painterly sort of an appeal, right? So after this, we have other examples like this. For example, the bed, the chair and the table that you see by Gerrit Revelt. So Gerrit Revelt was one of the important designers of 𝗳𝗧 school. So the founder members of the group included Mondrian, Van der Gerloo, architect, and Revelt and J.P. Oud. So these were the architects, designers who were working in the 𝗳𝗧 movement. So they were eager to develop a new aesthetic consciousness and an objective art, right, based on clear principles. Their work and research extended to the fine arts, city and town planning, the applied arts and philosophy. So it's a combination of various things: philosophy, applied arts, town planning, and architecture and fine arts. So it's a holistic sort of a movement you can see here. And let us move to another important, very important movement in the second decade that formed during the First World War is the Dadaism. So the slide that you have on your screen shows you where all Dada movement has started. It started in Zurich, then later in New York, and then in Berlin. So you can note down these names, and all these artists came together and started working together, but the work was really different. So it started in Zurich in a cabaret called Cabaret Voltaire, right? So because Zurich was a neutral city, in Switzerland, right. In 1919, someone called Tristan Tzara. Tristan Tzara was a literary figure. He was a writer. He invited artists, he sort of mobilized artists and thinkers and started this movement called Dadaism. Okay. So, at that point of time, and this happened in 1916, at that point of time, the European cities, were warring against each other. Okay. So, Zurich was a neutral city and Switzerland was not participating in the First World War. Okay, so which is why it was easy for the artist to kind of think something like this, and later in New York was also neutral. So it born out of negative reaction. So Dadaism basically is considered as an anti-art movement or anti-aesthetic movement. Dadaism criticized the ideas of aesthetics, the ideas of civilization that the Europe has, has been proud of, right? Why, if Europe has been great, if it has been developed and more modern, why is this war? So Dadaism basically started criticizing their own situation, criticizing the West, and the achievements of the West. So it was a very negative reaction to the horrors of World War I, because they were seeing a lot of pain, death, agony, and a lot of destruction. So it was a sort of a reaction to that destruction. Okay. So it became international, right, with international movement, with poets and artists, writers, and different kinds of people that came together. It rejected reason and logic. They went against reason and logic, praising nonsense, irrationality, and intuition. So they worked with the idea of irrationality. They worked with the idea of nonsense. Okay. These are very interesting things, because what happened to Europe with the celebration of rationality, because Europe was thinking, the European philosophy was based, like the modernism was largely based on the idea of rationalism, right, scientific thinking and rational thinking. So here these artists were criticizing and questioning. So all this rationality and scientific thinking actually led to destruction, actually led to the war. So now we will use nonsense, we will use irrationality, we will reject the reason, right. So they just wanted to play, so it became more playful. They used their ways of painting, their ways of activities were also very different. They were not serious, okay, because the entire seriousness about life led to war. So that was the idea. So from Zurich it spreads to Berlin after, and all these war exiles, because during the war, artists, writers, everybody was expected to participate in the war. Okay, and people who were not participating, people who were who invited doubt from the authorities, they went into exile. So they moved away from the main centers like cities of Germany or Paris, and cities in the France and other countries that participated in the First World War. These artists who could not fight the war, but at the same time who could not live in these cities, they ran away, they went away. So they became exiles in different cities, and Switzerland was one of the place, and Zurich was one of the city where they were all in exile. And hysteria, madness, and mass destruction was the things that really inspired. And humor was also something that, so humor was an important form, based on anarchy and the negative expression. Humor, the bad or the mad humor, goes against and criticizes the seriousness towards the society and life. Okay, so to basically criticize this rational approach of the European society and European thought, which led to the war, Dadaism emerged as a reaction, as a negative reaction to the war, actually, the horrors of war. And let us move to the artist and few images. Francis Picabia, he moved to New York and he started painting images like this, and he created machines like this, and these designs of the machines, he created designs like this, and these paintings that he produced of different machines, these were not real machines, these were all machines that he designed himself. Like, these are not functional also, these are just machines for the sake of painting. And when you look at it, it is very mathematically done, it is very graphic in the sense it does not create any sense of emotional feeling, right. And Dadaism and Dada movement went against the idea of aesthetic experience and the idea of art itself. So, if you look at Dada artworks, their artworks question the very experience of art and the art object. Okay. So, if you look at it, it looks like a drawing of a machine. It is a very like a drawing of, it is a mechanical drawing, it is an engineering drawing. It is not like a drawing of Rembrandt, maybe it is not like a drawing of Van Gogh or Picasso, where you can have certain kind of a sensibilities, you know, feelings and experiences. So, basically to remove all those, to not sort of allow those things happen in a more as a response to, you know, as a critical response to what was happening at that point of time. So, this is an example where the painting does not kind of give you any emotional or aesthetic experience. It is more calculated, it is more mathematical, it looks more dry, right. So, moving on to the next slide, this is Marcel Duchamp. Before the formation of Dada movement, Duchamp started with experimenting things like this, where he used ready-made objects and he placed them in such a way that they cannot be used. Okay. By removing their use value, he called them as sculptures. Okay. So, he produced several ready-mades like this, like for example, the bicycle wheel, right. If you upturn the bicycle wheel like this and he placed it on the table, right, otherwise bicycle wheel is the other way around, right, the wheel is on the ground. But what he is doing is, he is taking that bicycle wheel and fixing it onto the table and calling it as a sculpture, a ready-made sculpture. So, he started doing this, and it is a sort of a critique. Okay, it actually shocked people, and how can this be art, right? There has to be a drawing, there has to be a sculpture that is made out of clay or whatever, but this particular object is called sculpture, and how can this happen? And if you look at the ideas at this point of time, the ideas were to kind of respond to whatever happening was in the society, right. If you look at the European society at that point of time, it was extremely consumerist, right. Everything was available ready-made, okay. And the art object also became similar to the consumerist object, right. So, by doing an object like this, Duchamp was actually criticizing various things about art practice. He is criticizing about the authority of the artist, he is criticizing about the very consumerization of the art field, art object, you know. So, by buying something ready-made and placing it on the table and giving his sign, right. So, now once the artist is signing the object, it acquires the value of art, right. So, now he is signing everything and saying this is art. So, this is basically, these gestures basically sort of are nothing but criticism of art practice, and criticism of this idea of the great artist, the figure of the artist. And the next slide that you see is about the fountain. He called it fountain. What he did, again, he went to the hardware shop, he just bought this urinal and then placed it on the pedestal, and he called it as fountain, and he did this in 1917, right? And as you can see, he has signed it with 𝗬𝗏. 𝗬𝗏 is basically the factory that produced this particular urinal. Okay. So it is not Duchamp's name also, but it is the name of the manufacturer, right? So there are several things and very complex things happening here, right? And one needs to remember this particular example, which criticizes the entire infrastructure of the art field, right? The artist, the value of the art object, and the status of the art object, and the very making of the art object. Nowadays, as if you can buy and produce your own art object by just signing it. So he is criticizing several things. And now let us move to a movement called Surrealism. Surrealism was an offshoot of Dadaism. Many of the Dada artists actually went into formation of Surrealist movement. It was founded by André Breton. He was a poet. And what is Surrealism? Surrealism is nothing but, as you can see the definition on your screen, psychic automatism in its pure state, dictated by thought, in the absence of any control exercised by reason, exempt from any aesthetic or moral concern, right? So basically Surrealism deals with the psyche. It doesn't deal with the rational reasoning mind, or it doesn't deal with the feeling, the idea of experience and feeling. Okay, so not the experience and feeling like you have German expressionists painting or the earlier artist painting, not the reason, but it is the psychology, it is the psyche, it is the space of the dreams. So which is why it is not real, but it is surreal. Surreal, that which is not, that which cannot be seen by the eye, but you may see it in your mind when you sleep, right? So the next slide shows different artists who were part of Surrealist movement: André Breton, Max Ernst, Salvador Dali. Dali was a very prominent artist, and so they created this sort of a combined effort called Exquisite Corps, where different artists would come together and make one piece of art. This is an example where, for example, you make a drawing and close it, reveal half of it and send it to your friend. The friend will complete the drawing and close half and send it to another friend. So it's like that, and what you see here is produced like that. So the other artist didn't know what another artist was doing. So this is a sort of a combined effort which criticized the idea of a unique art piece produced by one single artist, the idea of this greatness of the artist. So the last image that we see now is this particular painting by Salvador Dali. It is called The Persistence of Memory. Dali was a Spanish artist, and he was a very important artist when it comes to Surrealism. He painted dreams, and this is one of the paintings that he produced out of his dreams. And so what you see here is a small, it's a vast landscape. In the forefront you have a sort of a seal, sort of a organism, very unusual, and you can see the nose. The nose looks like Dali's nose, okay, and the watches you see look like they are melting. It is a sense of time, as if the time is melting away, okay. And on the left side you have the ants on this closed watch, and it is placed on the table, and on the table you have a tree and branch. And when you look at this, the objects are placed in such a way that they are not logically related, right? Where in the dream you do not have logical relationships between one event and the other. Maybe you are in the morning, you just woke up and you went out, and maybe you went into a bar, or maybe something else happens. So that's how a dream works, and surrealists used dream material for their painting. And you have the vast landscape at the back, and Dali used this landscape several times. So we have seen in this particular discussion the 2 decades or 3 decades of art movements in relation to the kind of changing times and society and the kind of disturbance that was happening during the 2 world wars or between the 2 world wars. Thank you.